I never thought the most dangerous mission of my life would happen 20 years after I turned in my badge and uniform, and it certainly wasn't supposed to happen in my own living room while my daughter slept upstairs. You spend 2 decades in the Special Forces, seeing things that would make most people lose their minds, training until your bones ache and your reflexes are as sharp as a razor's edge. Also, you can eventually retire to a quiet life of mowing the lawn and drinking coffee on the porch. But that night, as I felt the cold barrel of a suppressed pistol pressed against the back of my neck, every single second of those 20 years came rushing back into my hands like a live wire. I realized right then that the universe hadn't been training me to survive the mountains of Tora Bora or the jungles of South America. It had been training me for this exact moment to protect the only thing I have left in this world. Was I wrong for the way I handled what came next? Or would you have gone just as far if your family's life was on the line? My name is Elias, and for 20 years I was a ghost, a shadow moving through the world's most hostile environments. But let me tell you, nothing is more hostile than a man who thinks he can take what's mine. To understand how I ended up in that position, you have to understand the life I lived before the silence of retirement. I joined the service at 18, driven by a cocktail of youthful rage and a desperate need for purpose. I didn't just want to serve, I wanted to be the best. I pushed through selection, survived the Q course, and spent the next 2 decades as part of a small, elite team that handled the problems the government didn't want on the evening news. I learned how to read a room in a millisecond, how to identify threats before they even drew a breath, and how to use anything from a ballpoint pen to a heavy-duty truck as a weapon of absolute necessity. My wife, Sarah, was the only thing that kept me grounded. She was the one who waded through the long deployments, who never asked where the scars came from, and who eventually convinced me that 20 years was enough. We had our daughter, Maya, late in life, and she became my entire world. When Sarah passed away from a sudden illness 3 years ago, my world narrowed down to a single point: keeping Maya safe and happy. We moved to a quiet suburb, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, and the biggest drama is a disputed property line. I took a job as a high-end security consultant, mostly remote work, and spent my days taking Maya to soccer practice and teaching her how to fix things around the house. I thought I was out. I thought the monster I had been for 20 years was finally asleep. The trouble started about 6 months ago, though I didn't recognize it as trouble at the time. A local developer named Marcus Thorne started buying up land in our neighborhood. He was the kind of guy who wore $3,000 suits and had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wanted to turn our quiet wooded area into a massive luxury high-rise complex, but there was a catch. He needed my property to make the zoning work. My house sits on a hill that overlooks the entire valley, a piece of land that Sarah and I had chosen specifically for the peace it provided. Thorne offered me double what the house was worth, then triple. I told him no every single time. It wasn't about the money, it was about the memories. Every time I looked at the height marks on the kitchen door frame where Maya was growing, or the garden Sarah had spent years perfecting, I knew I could never sell. But Thorne wasn't used to hearing no. He started small nuisance calls to code enforcement, accidental damage to my fence from his construction crews next door, and eventually subtle threats during chance encounters at the grocery store. He told me that everyone has a price, and that stubbornness was a very dangerous trait in an old man. I just laughed. He had no idea who he was talking to. He saw a retired guy in a flannel shirt. He didn't see the operator who had survived 3 separate assassination attempts in Eastern Europe. Things escalated 2 weeks ago when I noticed I was being followed. It was a black SUV with tinted windows, always 2 cars back, always turning off just before I reached my driveway. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but my internal radar was screaming. I began to fall back into my old habits. I did dry cleans on my way home, taking erratic routes to see if they stayed on me. They did. I checked my home's security, not the the shelf cameras everyone else has, but the specialized sensors I'd installed myself. I stayed up late, sitting in the dark, watching the street. Meyer asked me why I looked so tired, and I just told her I was working on a big project. I didn't want to scare her. I wanted her to stay the sweet, innocent girl she was, far away from the darkness I knew was creeping toward our front door. Then, 4 nights ago, Thorne called my personal cell, a number I hadn't given him. He didn't say hello. He just said, "Elias, I'm tired of games. My investors are losing patience. You have 48 hours to sign the papers, or things are going to get very uncomfortable for you and your daughter." That was the moment the switch flipped. The retired father went away, and the operator came back online. I didn't call the police. I knew Thorne had half the local precinct in his pocket. Instead, I went to my basement, moved a heavy workbench, and pulled up the floorboards. I pulled out a waterproof Pelican case I hadn't opened in 5 years. Inside was the gear that had seen me through the darkest corners of the globe. I didn't need the explosives or the heavy rifles. I needed the tools of a professional. I spent the next 2 days prepping the house. I didn't make it look like a fortress. I made it look like a trap. I reinforced the door frames, set up silent pressure plates under the porch rugs, and checked every line of sight from the windows. I moved Maya to a sleepover at her aunt's place 3 towns over, telling her I had a plumbing emergency that would make the house smell like rotten eggs. She complained, but she went. With her safe, I was free to work. I knew Thorne wouldn't come himself. He was a coward who hired muscles to do his dirty work. He'd send a crew, probably 3 or 4 guys, professional enough to be quiet, but arrogant enough to think they were the apex predators in a neighborhood of sheep. I spent the final evening sitting in my high-backed armchair in the living room. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there, breathing, slowing my heart rate, and letting my eyes adjust to the moonlight filtering through the curtains. I practiced the movements in my mind, thousands of repetitions of tactical drills from my time in the Special Forces. Every minute of those 20 years was a rehearsal for the performance I was about to give. Around 2:00 a.m., the sensors on my perimeter picked up movement. 3 figures, moving in a staggered stack, approaching from the tree line. They were good, I'll give them that. They moved with a disciplined silence that suggested military or high-end private security backgrounds. They bypassed the front door, choosing the sliding glass door in the back, the one I had intentionally left improperly locked. I heard the faint click of a glass cutting tool, then the soft slide of the door. My heart didn't race, it slowed down. That's what the training does to you. It turns fear into focus. I heard their footsteps on the hardwood light, controlled. They were using suppressed handguns, their silhouettes moving like ghosts through the kitchen. They thought they were the hunters. They had no idea I was watching them through the reflection in a darkened TV screen. They split up. One headed toward the stairs, likely to find Maya. One stayed in the kitchen as a lookout. The third, the leader, moved toward the living room where I was sitting. He was the one who got the drop on me, or so he thought. He stepped behind my chair, and that's when I felt the cold metal against my neck. "Don't move, old man," he whispered. "You should have signed the papers." So that's the situation I was in. I had a professional hitman's gun to my head, 2 more in my house, and my entire life's work on the line. I knew Thorn wouldn't stop until I was gone. Before I tell you what I did in the next 3 seconds, I want you to pause and comment below. If you had 20 years of elite combat training and someone threatened your child and held a gun to your head, how far would you go? Would you try to talk your way out, or would you show them exactly why they picked the wrong house? Tell me what you would have done in my shoes before you hear the rest. The leader made a fatal mistake, he talked. In my world, if you're going to kill someone, you do it. You don't gloat, and you don't get close enough for them to feel your breath. The moment he spoke, I knew exactly where his center of gravity was. In one fluid motion, I tilted my head to the left, the suppressed shot whizzing past my ear and burying itself in the upholstery. My right hand came up, grabbing the slide of his pistol and forcing it out of battery so it couldn't fire again, while my left elbow smashed back into his solar plexus. He wheezed, his lungs collapsing from the force, and I stood up, twisting his arm until the bone snapped like a dry twig. He dropped the gun, and I caught it before it hit the floor. The lookout in the kitchen heard the scuffle and rounded the corner, his weapon raised. I didn't even have to think. My muscle memory took over. 2 shots to the center mass, 1 to the head. The Mozambique drill. I'd practiced 10,000 times on the range. He went down without a sound. The third man, the one who had been halfway up the stairs, panicked. He started firing wildly down into the living room. I dived behind the sofa, the floorboards splintering around me. I reached under the cushions and pulled out a flash, bang grenade I'd taped there earlier. I pulled the pin, counted to 2, and tossed it toward the staircase. The explosion of light and sound was deafening, even with my ears tucked. I didn't wait for the smoke to clear. I moved with a speed that Thorn's men couldn't have imagined a man my age possessed. I was up the stairs while the third man was still clutching his eyes, screaming in disorientation. I didn't use the gun. I used my hands. I disarmed him with a wrist lock and sent him tumbling down the stairs, where he landed in a heap at the bottom. I followed him down, my movements predatory. The leader was still on the floor, gasping for air, clutching his shattered arm. I stood over him, the moonlight casting a long shadow. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terror he'd never known. He realized then that I wasn't a victim. I was the thing that people like him were supposed to be afraid of. I didn't kill him. That would have been too easy, and it would have brought the wrong kind of heat. Instead, I picked up his phone, used his thumb to unlock it, and found Thorn's number. I dialed it and put it on speaker. Thorn answered on the first ring, sounding smug. "Is it done?" he asked. I looked the leader in the eye as I spoke into the phone. "Marcus," I said, my voice as cold as a winter grave. "Your men are currently bleeding on my floor. You have 1 hour to transfer the deed to the neighboring lot you bought to a blind trust for my daughter's education, and then you're going to leave this state and never come back. If I ever see your face, or even hear your name mentioned in this town again, I won't be using a phone to talk to you. I'll be using the skills the government spent millions of dollars teaching me. Do you understand?" There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Thorn's breathing get shallow and ragged. He realized he hadn't just messed with a homeowner. He had kicked a hornet's nest of elite violence. I understand," he stammered before hanging up. I spent the rest of the night cleaning. I made Thorn's men haul their dead comrade out to their SUV. I told them if they ever spoke a word of this, I'd find them, and they knew I wasn't lying. They vanished into the night, leaving nothing but a few bloodstains I had to scrub out of the wood. The next morning, the deed transfer was confirmed by my lawyer. Thorn was gone by the end of the week, citing a sudden change in investment strategy. The neighborhood stayed quiet. Maya came home 2 days later, complaining about the smell of rotten eggs that wasn't there anymore. She sat on the porch with me, telling me about her soccer game, completely unaware that her father had turned into a ghost again for one final night. I looked at my hands, steady as a rock, and realized that those 20 years in the Special Forces weren't a waste or a burden. They were a gift, a set of tools I hope I never have to use again, but will never regret having. Every man has a breaking point, and every man has something worth fighting for. For me, it was the memory of my wife and the future of my daughter. Some might say I was a vigilante, that I should have called the cops and played by the rules. But the rules are written for people who don't have monsters knocking at their door. When the world comes for what you love, you don't ask for permission to protect it. You use every ounce of training, every bit of strength, and every second of experience you have to push the darkness back. I'm just an old man in a flannel shirt now, but I sleep soundly knowing that my home is a sanctuary, not because of the locks on the doors, but because of the man who stands behind them. Like this video if you were on my side and think I did what was necessary to protect my family. Subscribe for more stories like this where the underdog, or the retired, expert finally bites back. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Was I too harsh, or did Thorne get exactly what he deserved? I'll see you all in the next story.